spell it right? Evan Mangone, Mangone. We're good?
Yeah.
We're good. Hello, I'm Evan Mangone, and this is the fried egg story of addiction. From 1987, a PSA by the Partnership for a Drug-Free America famously declared that this is your brain on drugs. But today, we're going to prove this stereotype wrong. Turns out that we're all being conditioned in three major ways: what our social environment tells us, what the media tells us, and what the government tells us. But if we can be mindful of these influences, we can begin to form a more inclusive environment. And just maybe, the number of overdoses will begin to trend downward. Now, perhaps the first influence on our social disposition towards addicts comes from these four letters. Though well-intentioned, this is the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program. And for those of you who don't know, every fourth grader in the elementary school is gathered in an auditorium, and an officer proceeds to tell us a story of addiction. Told us stories of addicts who stole from their families, got in fights with their best friends, and committed heinous crimes. He showed us pictures like this. Pictures like this. At the age of 10, before we even knew what drugs were, this was the image we had in our minds of what an addict is supposed to look like. When it was over, I turned to my friend Jake. We were both scared and confused. A few minutes after that, every fourth grader in the room signed a piece of paper that they'd never do drugs. Fast forward 12 years and Jake does cocaine every day of his life. He's a good kid. I've known him since I was 5, but for most of that time, I've treated him nothing like a friend, and I've watched him deteriorate because of that. So where did DARE go wrong? Turns out they told us a fallacious and stereotypical lie about addiction, what I like to call the fried egg story of addiction, that says that this is what you look like if you're an addict, and that is all your brains are good for. But how does this story explain people like this in our society? What do these four men all have in common, other than their success? Mayor of Toronto, ESPN analyst, CEO of NASCAR, and former executive at Chipotle. They're also, all once were, or still are, addicts. But wait, they don't look like this, or like this, and their brains certainly don't look like this. These are intelligent, successful people. Thus, when you are keeping in mind how our social environment influences our disposition towards addicts, it is firstly important to remember that this affects everyone. Linda Carroll, Chief Nursing Officer at St. Peter's, says that this affects every socioeconomic barrier, every race, every age, every demographic you can think of. And guess what? She made these observations by observing our own community. Rutgers students, New Brunswick. And it is no surprise that we see the same lack of nuance reflected in the media. This is a simple Google image search of the word drug addict. I can tell you guys aren't even surprised because these images are everywhere, from shows as well-intentioned to the dramatized TV series Intervention to shows as ridiculous as Family Guy. They tell us an extreme and reductive lie about addiction. And thus, as we must think critically about our media, so too must we think critically about the government. I'm going to give you 3 examples of epidemics. Epidemic number 1, 1980s America. Reagan declares war on drugs, but it appears he declared war on the addicts. Because from 1980 to 1997, according to the Drug Policy Alliance, the number of incarcerated non-violent offenders went from 50,000 to over 400,000. My friend Jake is now part of these statistics. This set a precedent that continues to ravage our community to this day. Epidemic number 2, early 2000s, Portugal. They decriminalize everything. The UN freaks out. This is anarchy, mayhem. How could they do this? It appears that they're onto something because from 2000 to 2012, the number of overdoses went to 1/5 of what it was. How did they do this? Simple. When you catch an addict with possession, instead of sending him to prison and ostracizing him from the community, you send him to a rehab center like this, where he can treat his disease and get better and feel included. But oh wait, this is a different country, a different time period. What does this have to do with me? Well, epidemic number 3, the one happening right now in our own backyard. According to the Daily Targum, from 2015 to 2017, the number of RU drug arrests nearly tripled. And how we react to this is of the utmost importance. Will it be something like Bruce K. Alexander's rat park? This is an experiment in which all of these rats have cocaine in their environment and can self-administer at will. But none of them ever overdose because there's other rats, a social environment, wheels and balls to push around and give themselves meaning. But when we take away their social environment, like we do to addicts, and we tell them that all they're good for is drugs, like the media tells addicts. And we put them in a system in which they're designed to fail like the government does to addicts. Then every single time, these lonely rats get addicted to drugs and die. And so too will this happen to addicts, and it is happening to addicts right now. All because our social environment was told, the media was told, and even our government was told the fried egg story of addiction. Enough of the fear campaigns, enough of the stigma if we are going to see the number of overdoses start decreasing. But now's the time, and Rutgers is the place. We've always been on the forefront of inclusion. And as for that PSA, it stopped airing in 2016. And now we can begin to tell new stories of addiction, like the story of my friend Jake. It took my friend group quite a while to accept him and be mindful of these influences. But once we did, he started to get better. This semester, he's graduating from UPenn. He's moving out to California. He has a job, a future, just like any one of us. But because my friend group was aware of how our social environment affects us, how the media affects us, and how our government affects us, we do not call him a fried egg. And now you won't either. Thank you.